after Terrence Crawford has to go now and fight Errol Spence, of course. Errol Spence exercised that rematch clause after Crawford absolutely dominated him in July, and Crawford's waiting to see when that fight happens. Supposed to happen in February, nothing set yet. But the IBF, they do usually follow their own rules, unlike the other ones, even if their rules don't always make sense. And the IBF does not recognize or respect rematch clauses.
Well, as you guys have already heard, Bud Crawford has officially been stripped by the IBF over the Boots Enos mandatory. According to what's floating out there, he put it out there that he would not be able to fulfill the mandatory obligation to face Boots Ennis due to the fact that he has a rematch clause with Errol Spence Jr. Now, I want to say this and get it out the way. Errol Spence, even if he beats Bud Crawford, will not be undisputed. It's his own fault. Now, going into this fight, Bud versus Errol, the IBF had already put it out there that they wanted the winner of that fight to face Boots Ennis. They had already laid it out there. And you can go back as far as December to prove that. And you have some reports going back as far as May of 2022. Now, I couldn't find an actual IBF source for that, so I'm willing to let that go. But we know for a fact, back in December, they mandated it. Now, you say, well, yeah, but they had a rematch in the contract, etc., etc. The IBF doesn't care about rematch clauses, and truth be told, honestly, if you look at the bylaws of the WBC, WBA, IBF, and the WBO, they all say the same thing. A rematch clause really isn't binding according to their bylaws. If you have a mandatory sitting in waiting after that undisputed match or after that unification match, they don't care about a rematch clause. And let's look at, we can prove it. Let's look at the IBF bylaws. It says clauses in the championship contract. The purpose of the rule is to ensure that no contract provision interferes with the mandatory defense of a title. No contract or championship contest shall contain any clause or any provision whatsoever guaranteeing or in any way assuring or promising either contested or return championship contest where such clause or provision interferes with the mandatory defense of a title. Period. They don't mess around with this. Well, I can't say that because they have looked the other way for other fighters. Matter of fact, Errol Spence being one of them, because he hasn't fought a mandatory, from what I understand, since like Danny Garcia. That was supposedly the last true mandatory that Errol Spence has faced. Now you can say something that's due to injury, etc., etc., but it is what it is. Reality is this: all of the sanctioning bodies at some point in time made provisions for Errol Spence to get unification fights in line. Him versus Sean Porter for the WBC. Him versus Ugas. Well, first him versus Manny Pacquiao. Then him versus Ugas for the WBA super title. Then they made provisions for him and Terrence Crawford to fight. Now I get it. It took a while to make that fight happen, but Spence could have been fighting in between then, and he did not. He could have gotten that Boots Ennis mandatory out of the way. He said he wasn't interested in fighting Boots Ennis at all because he didn't have a title. So, in effect, that's Errol Spence's fault. His past transgressions are coming back to bite him in the behind. Because, as I just stated, while he was waiting to get that Terrence Crawford fight lined up, he could have easily fought Boots Ennis. Now, whether he would have beat him or not, who knows? And to be honest with you, if you really was listening to what Errol was saying, he had no intentions on fighting Boots anyway. He wanted that Crawford fight, then he was out. He was going to 154. He never showed any interest in fighting Boots Ennis, even before he said he was moving up to 154. He said he didn't have anything to offer him, nothing to bring to the table. Something like what Keith Thurman said about him back in the day, remember that? Just saying. Now, to be fair, you have guys like Canelo who aren't fighting real mandatories, and if it is a mandatory, it's a cupcake mandatory. Jamel Charlo, he hasn't fought in over a year and a half. Jamal Charlo, I mean, we're seeing this happen where guys are holding on to their titles, even with the IBF, where they wasn't necessarily stripped for ridiculous amount of time without even fighting, less than only fighting a mandatory. Why all of a sudden Bud Crawford is getting stripped immediately almost after their fight is beyond me. It doesn't make any sense. But I will say this, if it is somebody you can point to, it's Errol Spence, because when was the last time he fought an IBF mandatory? See what I'm saying? Now, look at Spence last couple fights. Fight dates. Terrence Crawford, back in July. It's November now, but whatever. I don't even want to count that. But before that, him and Ugas, over a year ago. Him and Danny Garcia, that's his last 3 fights. Danny Garcia, he fought almost 3 years ago. 3 fights. Sean Porter, back in over 4 years ago. That's his last 4 fights. Mikey Garcia, I mean, he hasn't been active. These guys are getting away with not being, and it ain't like Terrence been the most active guy in the world, but my point still remains. He could have gotten, you could say the injury, no, stop it. Between Ugas and Crawford, he could have gotten that Enos fight in. It could have happened. He said he wasn't fighting nobody else until he got Bud. Then he was moving up to 154. So in my opinion, this is Errol Spence's fault. This rematch will not be for the mandatory, for Undisputed. And that's pretty much all I got. This Head Busting Boxes on Fight Doctor. Hit that like button, hit that share button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Hit me up in the comment section, let me know what you think. Is Errol Spence to blame for them not fighting for Undisputed? Because after all, he had the title. He could have been got it out of the way. Or do you blame the IBF for being sticklers to a rule that they sometimes don't enforce with other fighters? Gotta think about it. Hit me up in the comment section. Let me know. This Head Busting Boxes on Fight Doctor. I am out.